The rhythmic thump of rotor blades echoed through the night like a war drum in the clouds. Beneath the dim red light inside the helicopter cabin, the man sat silent, helmet snug over his silver-streaked hair, his hands resting on a borrowed rifle. Around him, the enemy soldiers laughed, traded rough jokes, and spat sunflower seed husks onto the floor. They called each other by code names, their dialect sharp and clipped, their uniforms crisp. His, by contrast, felt strange, tight in all the wrong places, stitched with patches he didn't earn. But none of them noticed. They thought he was one of them. He kept his face in shadow and his voice unused. The war had taught him when silence was safer than truth. 58-year-old Thomas "Hawk" Branson had seen more than his share of battlefields. A retired airborne technician turned civilian analyst, he'd been pulled back into service when the fighting reignited along the fractured eastern front of a once stable region. The U.S. had officially stepped away, but men like Hawk weren't government anymore. They were ghosts, volunteers, advisors, watchers in the dark. And now, after 3 weeks behind Allied lines, he was dressed in the enemy's garb, flying straight into the heart of their base. The plan had been desperate. Their intel had dried up after a communications blackout. The enemy, a brutal paramilitary coalition called the Iron Dawn, had begun moving in unpredictable patterns, wiping out entire villages and cutting through supply routes like wolves among sheep. Hawk had proposed the unthinkable: intercept a wounded enemy unit during a skirmish, strip a corpse, and use the uniform to infiltrate their base via air transport. No one else had volunteered. At his age, they figured he'd lost it. But Hawk had been watching, listening. He'd learned just enough of their language. He'd studied their gear. And when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. The helicopter banked sharply, descending toward the dark sprawl of the Iron Dawn forward base, a skeletal grid of hangars, armored trucks, floodlights, and antennae punching into the sky. Fires burned in distant oil drums. Crates of munitions glowed under tarps. This was no ramshackle militia camp. It was organized, efficient, dangerous. As the bird touched down, the soldiers leapt out, barking orders. Hawk followed, falling into line like he belonged. His boots struck the tarmac with familiar certainty. He didn't look around too much. Never meet eyes, never linger. He kept his head low, the helmet visor casting a shadow over the sun-weathered lines of his face. Inside, his pulse thudded in time with the receding rotor. He peeled off from the group, slipping between parked vehicles and supply crates. If they caught him now, it was over. But the camp was alive with movement. No one noticed another soldier moving with purpose. He found a shadowed corner behind a comms shack, ducked down, and drew a small tablet from inside his vest, a rigged piece of tech built to hack and mirror enemy transmissions for short bursts. He tapped it once, silently, and waited. A green light blinked. Nearby, he heard the murmur of voices, boots crunching gravel, a smoker coughing near the barracks. Inside the comm center, he could see silhouetted figures through the tinted windows. Radios. Screens. Maps. He wouldn't get in there. Too secure. But a line ran from the back wall to a substation nearby. If he could tap into that line, he might siphon off encrypted data before anyone noticed. His fingers worked fast, despite the arthritis that ached like old regrets. The adapter fit. The tablet began pulsing softly. Downloading. 60 seconds. Behind him, laughter. 2 soldiers walked past, close enough to see the scuffed toes of his boots. He didn't move. They didn't stop. 30 seconds. He remembered a field hospital in Kandahar, back in '91, where a younger Hawk had pulled shrapnel from a buddy's gut with a pair of sterilized pliers and prayers. He remembered a dusty garage in Georgia where he taught his son how to rebuild carburetors. He remembered the sting of being told he was too old to matter anymore. 10 seconds. A sudden shout nearby. Too close. A radio squelched. A searchlight flared on, sweeping the yard. Someone had tripped an alarm. 3 seconds. The tablet buzzed softly. Complete. He yanked the cord, tucked the device back under his vest, and moved fast. Not running. Running got you noticed. He moved like he belonged, like a man on orders. But his heart was hammering now, and every step echoed like thunder. He turned the corner behind a prefab barracks and ducked low behind a water tank just as boots clattered past the alley behind him. Someone barked in the native tongue, "Check every row. There's an infiltrator." So they knew. Somehow. He gritted his teeth. He still had to get out. A helicopter revved nearby. Smaller. A recon model. Maybe unmanned. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't his ride. His original plan had been to stow away on the same bird he'd arrived on, but it was already airborne. He needed a new exit, and fast. The old instincts kicked in. He moved like he was 20 years younger. He found a side corridor beside the maintenance shed. The noise of a generator masked his steps. He spotted a uniform on a laundry line, an officer's jacket. Risky. But if they were looking for a grunt, they'd overlook an officer. He pulled it on over his own, adjusted the insignia, and wiped some grime onto his face to look freshly field-worn. Then, head held higher now, he strode toward the launch pad. "Commander!" a young voice called out. Hawk turned, eyes cold under the visor. The kid saluted. "We've got orders to ground all flights. There's a breach." Hawk nodded slowly, graveling his voice into a gruff approximation of the local accent. "That's why I'm taking command of this unit myself. Directive 44A. Move aside." The soldier hesitated, blinked, then saluted again, stepping back. Sometimes confidence was more powerful than a weapon. The platform was just ahead. A crew was prepping a small armored scout heli, open seating, light armament. Perfect. No time for subtlety now. He climbed aboard, nodded at the co-pilot, who barely looked up. "Where are we heading, sir?" the man asked. Hawk leaned forward, glanced at the coordinates scribbled on the map taped to the console. "Same route. I'll take it from here." He sat back, heart pounding, tablet pressed tight against his ribs. The base was alive with chaos now. Alarms, shouted orders, soldiers on the move. He wondered how long it would take before they realized the breach had already taken flight. Above them, the moon peeked through tattered clouds like a watchful eye. The rotors spun up. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, Hawk didn't look back. Not yet. The mission had only just begun. Beneath the thick hum of distant rotors and the crackle of a burning perimeter fence, Grant Mercer crept through the underbelly of the enemy compound. Dressed in the stolen uniform of the opposing force, patched, soot-stained, and heavy with the weight of a younger man's war, he moved with a cautious confidence that came only from decades of battlefield instincts. The helicopter that had delivered him was now little more than a smoldering distraction on the far side of the compound, precisely where he wanted their attention. But inside these high concrete walls, where spotlights swept lazily and boots echoed on gravel, the stakes were multiplying by the minute. He wasn't just looking for documents. He was after evidence of something deeper, darker, a secret intelligence corridor the enemy had built under the barracks, rumored to house command data, war plans, and the identities of double agents embedded across the border. Sliding behind a row of parked vehicles, Grant waited, breath held, as a group of young soldiers marched past, joking in hushed tones, their rifles slung lazily as if nothing serious could possibly happen on their watch. He remembered being that young once, back in '68, before the frost of duty settled into his bones. But sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Ducking into a storage shed marked logistics, he rifled through papers, bypassing decoys, until he found a clipboard with coordinates and a time-stamped signature from 2 days ago, proof that their next target wasn't a military post, but a civilian town near the border. A false flag operation. His hands trembled for just a second. That was all he allowed. Just then, a noise. Footsteps, faster now. He slipped behind a stack of crates as a soldier entered, muttering curses and lighting a cigarette. Smoke drifted toward Grant, stinging his eyes, and for a moment he wondered if this was where his cover would break. But luck, or maybe fate, held steady. The soldier left. Grant exhaled. Then, in the dim light of a cracked emergency bulb, he spotted a hatch in the floor, half covered by a tarp and labeled in fading chalk, "Echelon Access." He hesitated. This was it. The center of the storm. Reaching for the hidden comm tucked into his vest, he whispered a code phrase only 2 people alive would recognize. Static. Then a voice. "Reading you, Mercer." It was Ellison, his old handler. "Proceed with Phase 2. You're not alone in there." As the base exploded in chaos behind him, Alan crouched low behind the smoldering wreck of a supply truck, smoke curling around him like ghostly tendrils. The stolen uniform clung to him with sweat, dust, and guilt. Sirens howled. Foreign commands barked through radios. But Alan's focus was razor-sharp. He checked the stolen map again, hands trembling slightly. He had only minutes before the enemy locked down the perimeter. He bolted through the alleyway between hangars, ducking beneath cables, weaving past oil drums. 2 guards turned the corner ahead, rifles ready, but he melted into shadow, pressing his back against the cold steel wall. Their boots clanged past. He exhaled slowly. His objective lay beyond the communications tower, a control room buried beneath the old bunker. That's where the files were, the names, locations, and strategic plans that could prevent the next attack. Alan moved like a ghost, his years of field experience kicking in. His knees ached, but his resolve was granite. He reached the back of the tower, disabling a side panel with a knife and a memory of where the wires used to be in the last war. The door hissed open. He slipped inside. The interior was colder than he expected, humming with fluorescent lights and tension. A young technician looked up, startled. Alan didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he held up a crumpled cigarette and mumbled something in broken dialect. The boy hesitated. Alan walked past him like he belonged, heart thundering. At the far end, a staircase spiraled downward. He took it 2 steps at a time. Underground, the corridors narrowed, echoing with the distant rattle of boots above. Alan passed old war murals peeling off the concrete walls, his breath visible in the cold air. He reached a reinforced door, entered the stolen code. It clicked open. Inside, banks of computers blinked. 3 men stood over a console. Alan walked in like a senior officer, barked a command. 2 turned to look, confused. The 3rd froze, eyes narrowing. Alan slammed a fire extinguisher into his head. The other 2 lunged, but Alan dodged and cracked one in the knee with his rifle, dislocating it. The last dropped his weapon, backing away. Alan bound them with cable ties and locked the door from inside. He moved to the computer terminal. English, thank God. He inserted the drive and downloaded everything. Satellite logs, supply routes, deployment orders. Minutes ticked by. On the screen, a timer. 02:19. 02:18. Each second felt like a bullet in his skull. Then, download complete. He erased the logs, crushed the drive's connector underfoot, and set a timed overload on the mainframe. On his way out, he left the guards conscious. "You'll need to explain this yourselves," he muttered. Back in the corridor, the lockdown had begun. Steel doors hissed shut one by one. Alan sprinted, rolling under a half-closed barrier just as it sealed. His lungs burned. Sirens now screamed like banshees. He exited the bunker into chaos, helicopters above, soldiers shouting, spotlights sweeping. He couldn't go back the way he came. Instead, he tore off the enemy jacket and crawled beneath a fuel truck, waiting as boots stormed past him. One soldier paused, too close. Alan held his breath, clutching a stone in case he had to strike. The soldier moved on. He ran west, through the scrubland behind the mess hall, into a ditch where old munitions were dumped. There, covered in leaves and oil, sat the last piece of his escape plan, a rusted dirt bike planted weeks ago by a contact. Alan wiped the seat with his sleeve, jammed the keys in, and kicked the starter. It coughed. Again. And again. On the 4th kick, it roared. Shouts erupted behind him. He didn't look back. The bike tore through the outer fence, sparks flying. Bullets screamed past. A spotlight caught his back for a second, then he veered into a trench. Gone. The forest swallowed him. 30 minutes later, he crossed into neutral ground. The bike sputtered and died, but he didn't need it anymore. A safe house was 2 clicks north. Alan stood in the moonlight, eyes glassy. He had done it. No blood spilled by his hand. No names betrayed. And yet, The weight of the war still clung to him like smoke. He looked to the stars, whispered something no one would hear, and walked into the trees.